So, John, what is AI for?
I think AI is for helping people do things that take a long time or are tedious. A lot of people have talked about really wanting AI to get to the point where it will do their laundry for them. I definitely resonate with that. Things that most people don't really enjoy and wish that they have more time.
Because I've been thinking about what the reason an AI engineer or researcher, I mean, there's going to be multiple different reasons. For example, there's multiple different reasons that I make music, but what are they? What is the purpose of what they're doing? Now, obviously, there's making money, there's changing the world, but the reason that they are developing this technology, or the reasons that they're developing this technology, has a very fundamental impact on what the technology ends up becoming. Because am I right in thinking that it isn't written in stone that the current way that most AI is necessarily the way that isn't AI. It's just a way of doing AI. It's based upon certain reasons for doing it. Maybe is am I
Yeah,
right in saying that? Yeah.
yeah, I completely agree with that. I would go even further, which is to say that I expect it will change. It will change a lot over time. The way that people are doing it now it has changed before. I think it's gonna change again. So when you're talking about AI, like last podcast, we talked about AI music generators like Suno and Udio. So this is the
Hmm.
kind of thing that we have in mind when we're talking about like people in working in the music and AI and creating new products. I think this is just one way of doing things, and there are many other ways of doing it. Can I ask you what do you think from your perspective? Do you have an opinion on what the reasons are behind the way that things are working in AI at the moment?
Well, I can only go on what people say, and just to be clear, I'm not after my initial flurry of amazement and then obsession. This is always what happens with me, and I'm sure it happens to lots of other people, where something happens in the world, like a new technology appear. Well, it's not a new technology, but a technology suddenly kind of breaks through into the mainstream, and then I kind of get obsessed with it to find out what's going on, and then I'm like, okay, I know what's going on, and then I just sort of get back to my normal life, right? So apart from that initial flurry, back when ChatGPT broke through, I, I do use it, but it's not becoming the central focus of my life as it was there for a while. Um, it's not like I'm following the. I kind of am, but at multiple different removes. But from what I can tell, some of the people who are doing the AI research see a future. They have a vision of a future where human beings, and I'm giving the most charitable interpretation here, just because my approach in general, if I have a lack of information, is to, and this isn't necessarily, it has its downsides, right? But is to, I assume that people are doing things for the right reasons. So I'm going to give a charitable interpretation. And I think when people do things for the wrong reasons, that's because the incentives have been created, and then they end up justifying things which are bad. That's just my sort of approach. In a why not assume the best when I have a lack of information? Right? Is I don't assume the worst of everyone. So a charitable interpretation is that what you said is that the people who are developing these AI tools want human beings to do more meaningful work and less grindy work that they perceive as being less meaningful. Which, of course, if we look at something like, not that I'm an expert here, but for something like Zen, where you can make washing up, you're doing the washing up meaningful by how you do the washing up and the reasons that you're doing the washing up for. So there is a questionable assumption there, which is what precisely what we are doing determines its meaning. For example, and you can actually see it in self. Unless I change the entire course of human history and the human race, what the human race does and how it does it, then I'm having no impact. That's not true. Like, simply by us having this conversation, we are changing the world right now. The conversation I had with my boy Charlie yesterday is changing the world right now. When I'm having that conversation, that's changing the world. So it's almost like a very coarse macro way of looking at what is meaningful. It's all very well for me to sit here in my kind of ivory tower of making music and being very kind of privileged, my privileged position, and saying, well, there can be a lot of meaning in emptying bins, because I'm not emptying. I mean, I empty our bins here, but you know what I mean? That's not what I do for a living. So I'm not. So again, that's difficult too. But it's interesting that there is an assumption there that, for example, who wants to mix tracks, right? That's much less meaningful than making the notes. And you might be surprised that I don't believe that's true, given my approach to making music. I believe that some people will find more meaning in mixing tracks than they will making them, because of who they are. So yeah, anyway, I've said a lot there. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I really like that perspective, that answer, and the examples as well. It's very difficult to say for anyone else what part of the process is going to be meaningful. Like, there was some stage where I knew nothing about mixing, where I might have said that, that mixing is not meaningful, you know, compared to playing the notes, or choosing the notes, writing the notes, or playing an instrument or something like that. But having learned more and done some mixing myself, and seeing other people, and talking to other people who really love that, yeah, I definitely don't feel that way. And I'm never going to get to the point where I don't have those sort of uninformed assumptions, right? Like, about other people. It's sort of impossible. Yeah, it's impossible. But I think when you're making like a technology, right? So you're talking about people who are making technology, you have to make assumptions in order to make a thing, because you just have to make a concrete thing. You have to make decisions. It can't be everything to everybody at the same time. So you got to make some assumptions. Yeah, I do think that it sometimes takes a while to get perspective on what assumptions have been made, because when you try a new technology, like, it's very exciting, and any given person using it, like, you have something you didn't have before. So, it doesn't stop you from doing what you did before. It doesn't, like, really take anything away from you necessarily directly by existing. But yeah, it also might be making a lot of assumptions that will take a while for people to figure out. Assumptions, to go back to that point about, like, taking out the bins or doing the laundry. It's probably making a lot of those assumptions about what is just doing the laundry or taking out the bins. And if you build too many of those assumptions in, then I think at some point you're not going to be able to make art with it, because
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? When I'm making a piece of music, I am, and all of these are true, I am pushing buttons and clicking trackpads and I'm literally pushing buttons. There is a sense in which that is what I am doing. Nothing else. I'm simply pushing buttons, right? Another thing that I am doing is I am playing notes, making chords, playing chords. Another thing that I am doing is using my skills. I'm practicing my abilities, building my abilities. I'm growing. Another thing that I'm doing is making something beautiful. But that's actually rarely happens. But on a good day, it's very rare good days. I'm making something beautiful, and I'm also expressing something in my experience, or something about the world, or something about myself. I'm also being a musician. I'm also trying to become a singer-songwriter, which is different from using my skills or growing my skills, right? I'm also doing something to inspire other people, to help other people, right? I'm also, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think about this very much, but I think it's probably there. I'm also creating something that might be remembered beyond me. So all of those things are true, right? And like, from pushing buttons to helping people, to that, all of those things are true about what I'm doing, and it's almost like they're different. What am I actually doing here? I mean, what pushing buttons? Why am I pushing those buttons and not other buttons? Well, it's because of everything that's above that. Because at the end of the day, all I am doing at any point when I'm making music is pushing buttons, like whether they're piano keys or, I mean, of course, I don't play the guitar, so but yeah, the equivalent of playing the guitar, picking a metal string. that is literally how music, how playing the guitar is done, right? You pushing at that level, it's meaningless, and so there are all of these levels above it which create the meaning. And actually the music, not even the music, what somebody hears it contains all of that information. Right? It's like it contains everything, and it's not necessarily that information is going to be transmitted to the other person, but it is contained within that sound wave, that stereo audio file, and what ends up hitting somebody's ears. And so, in relation to an AI, somebody, I mean, someone who's making, I mean, you can't speak for them, of course, but what might be the assumptions that somebody who is making, for instance, Suno, and by the way, the reason I talk about Suno is it's funny, I prefer Suno's music, even though it's mainly terrible. I actually prefer Suno's sound to, what was the one that you sent through?
Udio.
Udio, yeah. It's like it's really weird. It's almost like they're different artists, because they have a certain sound, which is interesting in itself, which I think is also probably reflecting what we're talking about here, is that maybe their different approaches to, or maybe what they've trained on or something, I don't know, but their different approaches to this problem actually means that they have a different sound. To me, Suno sounds, it might just be because it was the first one I heard, but Suno has a vibe to it which I prefer. I mean, having said that, it's, as I said, mainly terrible. To Udio, that just feels a bit colder or something. There's something about it which is just, I don't know, it's just more away from me. But anyway, coming back to the point, what do you think are the could be the assumption, some of the assumptions that somebody making something like a Suno or an Udio are making? What do you think it could be, or what is the reason that they might be doing it? Not that they are doing it, but they might be doing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe the most like direct answer is that those are businesses, right? And they have business reasons for doing it. They can earn money from it. I don't think that's the only reason. I think that people working on those kinds of like big music generation platforms are also interested in trying to help people like be more expressive musically, create things faster, be more of a director rather than like having to do every detail by yourself type of thing. Um, so I think I think that's probably that's sort of the one way of describing where people are coming from two different perspectives. Us, yeah, I think there's probably a lot of assumptions that people are making. One of them might be that the value in a piece of music is defined by a sort of objective quality, that there is some objective definition of what a good piece of music is and what a bad piece of music is. And that that and along with that it's enough to just, if you saw all the button presses that, to go back to your point about the different layers of things you're doing when you're making music, that if you saw all the lowest level details and you looked at it super closely and you studied just how you pressed all those buttons, that would be enough to understand the meaning of the piece of music that you made.
Do you
Yeah.
think that's the reason from going to the last podcast? And by the way, if you're watching this podcast, we messed up the video, so it's only audio. So if you're watching this on YouTube, click a link in the description to listen to the last podcast on the podcast feed. So anyway, so do you think that is the reason that we had the hobgoblin problem? The word hobgoblin was sang so inappropriately as to be hilarious. Is that I mean, could there be? I mean, I don't know if we can answer this. It's more of a rhetorical question, but yeah, could there be ever a point at which, at the level of the button pushing, you could understand how to sing Hobgoblin?
um it would be really hard. I'm not saying it's physically impossible, but it would be really, really hard. It would be way harder to do that than to make the current level of AI models. And the difference between those two things, you might not be obvious on first look, right? Because it's the difference between something that where the buttons are pushed in a very similar way and follow a lot of the same patterns, and it captures a lot of the elements of the music, but um, it misses, or it's not trying to make meaning out of it. There's no um, it might, like, and I think some people are of this opinion when they see the impressive things that ChatGPT or other AI things can do, is they sort of ascribe meaning to it. But I think a lot of people who maybe thought that, when ChatGPT first came out, have like spent more time with it and are seeing that um, after you experience enough hobgoblin situations, like you start to realize that it's doing kind of a fundamentally different thing than what humans do. And it would be way harder to capture what you're doing when you're making music at all those levels of like, what is the experience in my life that led me to, come up with this word, or like, what emotions am I feeling? Who am I trying to reach? All of these things, like, it's much harder to capture that in like in AI. It's much harder to program an AI to do all of that than it is to just sort of like copy the patterns that it sees at the
I mean,
button pushing level.
yeah, I mean, something.
Nobody knows how to do it. That's what people were trying to do for decades in AI, and nobody was funding it because nobody could do it. And then sort of the approach changed to like turning the current approach, which is crunch a bunch of data, and we can do lots of really impressive, useful things by crunching data. But we have given up on trying to do that like deeper problem of sort of having meaning and sort of having a model of like the entirety of experiencing the world.
Yeah,
Like that's just too hard. Nobody's figured it out.
I mean the distinction, a distinction that I draw in my music coaching is that of, and just to be clear, I'm defining the words myself here. Okay, so I make a distinction between purpose, the purpose of music, and the function of music. Now, arguably, purpose is a subtype of function, right? But the reason I'm making the distinction is a similar thing. It's a similar distinction here, in that. I mean, actually, why don't you describe it? I'm going to put you on the spot now, John. This is your test. What's the difference between purpose and function in terms of the way I describe it in the Make Music Your Life coaching terms?
Yeah. So I'll do my best.
Yeah.
Purpose is sort of what is this piece of music trying to express? What is sort of like the fundamental core thing that it's about? This could be a story, an emotion, an experience, some just sort of like fundamental element that you're trying to express. You could sort of write this down in like a couple sentences. It's a bit abstract, but it's like um it's a thing that in your coaching we use like sort of earlier on while we're kind of sketching a draft of the piece, right? And we need to make decisions. This is kind of like the core thing um, that's really helpful to focus on in order to like move forward, right? And function is really different from purpose. It's separate from that core idea of like what it's expressing. It's more just about the situation where it like what's it doing for the listener.
Yeah,
What situation is the listener in?
yeah.
Are they
Where, for who, and why? Why are they listening to it? Why is the listener listening to the music? In what situation? Like where? So, for example, a clubber on a dance floor to dance, right? That's so the all of, well, maybe not all, but most of a DJ's music that they produce will have the function of making people dance. There are other functions too, so getting signed to a label, making money, right? These are all different functions of the music, but it's true of most of their music. Whereas each of those individual pieces of music can have a different purpose, which is like this one is to express this or is to express that. Now, a lot of one of the reasons that I have over time become somewhat disillusioned with not all, but some of electronic dance music is because, to me anyway, compared to when I'm getting sounding old now, when I started, but it's got more and more functional. It's got more and more focused on function. And it's almost like there's this flywheel of function happening where people are just focused on the functional elements at the expense, in my opinion, of what is more meaningful, which is the sort of purpose of the music. I mean, in fact, I think the reason that I take such exception to it is because this is what happened to me without me even knowing it. Like in my previous career, it was almost one of the things that happened. Many things happened that led to the utter failure, and just it kind of me flaming out on it was that it all just became functional, and I'd just forgotten the purpose of what I was doing. And so coming back to the AI question, there is a sense in which, I mean, for example, the reason that I appreciate, well, when I say appreciate, I like one of the things I'm looking for from AI is hallucination, right? Is it being either very wrong or completely ridiculous, or even ChatGPT, like text AI, or even I was saying before we started recording, I'm about to go into a week of completing my current album, and what I'm going to do is I am actually going to put each of the songs' lyrics into Suno to see what it comes up with. Not because I'm going to actually use anything in there, but it's going to give me a different perspective, and sometimes a hilarious one, and a ridiculous one, because that then allows me to see what I'm doing differently. Because it's
when
almost like
you
it's interpreting it in the wrong way, which is useful to
yeah
for me to understand what's important. It's like the negative space of it being the wrong thing helps me understand what the right thing is. Does that make sense?
yeah that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a really cool idea. I think more people should try that. When it does the wrong thing, I imagine it will probably do the wrong thing in some ways with the function that you're intending, but it will probably do the wrong thing much more so with the purpose. Is that
Well,
what
it's
you're
almost
expecting?
like it's doing exactly the right thing with the function, that it's completely wrong for the purpose. I mean,
Yeah.
the examples that we played last week, where the way it sang Hobgoblin, or the, you know, even so there's the anthemic future bass one, which was so funny, right? But in terms of it doing the fun, I mean, actually I can't get that bloody thing out of my head. I think I have a problem. It's literally, it's like an earworm of the most enormous proportions. Okay, it's almost as bad as Baby Shark, right? It's like it's actually done the functional thing very, very well. It's actually really good what it's done, but and so, but purpose wise, it's utterly terrible. I mean, it
Yeah.
couldn't be
So
worse.
in
Yeah,
service of getting the function right, it has destroyed the purpose of your song.
yeah,
And if we take on faith that um you need both of those things, that you want both of those things in your music, which most artists, I would say, that really matters to. Like that's setting aside, you know, functional music for some other purpose, for some other, situation, um, to elevator music or
yes,
something that's supposed to accompany something that
mm,
really isn't trying to express anything
yeah.
artistic. Like if we set that aside and are talking about music made as an artist, um, purpose, having a purpose is essential. Like it's not, you wouldn't call it a finished piece of music if the purpose, if it doesn't have a purpose, if there's no purpose being expressed. And so when you took your track and you put it into the to Suno, what you found was that it did amazing with the function, but in that process, it destroyed the purpose. So you lost something at the same time.
Well, it didn't even. Yeah,
And
yeah. It didn't have any purpose beyond the function. It was simply
yeah,
function. It
yeah,
was. It was. Right. Here's an example of these words in an anthemic future bass style. I'm not sure I'd call it anthemic future bass, but anyway. But in that style, whatever that style is, right?
yeah,
And here's a really great example of that style with these words. It's just it's pushing, as we coming back to the pushing buttons. It's at the level of almost pushing buttons. Like it's even musically correct in the sense of the melody works, the where the uh emphases, is that right, emphases are on the words is right.
yeah,
You know, the way it scans, it's right, right. It's like technically correct. And
yeah,
this is why I mean, you know, it was interesting you just said, John, that without a purpose, a piece of music can't be described as being finished. I would say that is true even if the artist is unaware of the purpose. Right? It's like and the reason that I get people to think about the purpose of a piece of music is that what I've noticed is often people know that there's something wrong with this piece of music and they're just listening to it at the level of function, right, the technical level, and they try all of these technical things to fix the problem, and it still doesn't work, and so then they give up. And
Yeah.
often the reason is, if there's somebody who doesn't think about purpose, who hasn't thought about purpose, is that there is they are actually, whether they know it or not, attempting to express something. They're not aware of what they're trying to express, and what is going on in the music is conflicting with that unconscious thing that they're trying to get across. So, but by becoming aware of it, and it is often like it's often a detective story that you're in. You're actually trying to find out what you're trying to express. So it's not, I mean, and the way that you do it is by just taking a guess, or sometimes, and you just go, right, this is what I'm trying to express. And then you go, actually, no, that's not, it's this. It's almost like the music wants to, this isn't the reality, but it feels like this. The music wants to express something, and you're trying to find out what it is. Like something specific. This piece of music wants to express something specific, and you're trying to find out what it is. And then when you actually get what that thing is, now with that purpose, and it's like it gives you an objectivity to say, okay, so how is this piece of music not expressing its purpose? Oh, what's going on? So instead of saying this section is too long, which is, it's a very frequent thing that people often say, this section is too long, they go, well, actually what's going on is this is meant to be expressing some kind of rising tension because it's about this, that, or the other, whatever the story might be. And there's no tension there. It's just doing the same thing. So it's repeating itself, right? So it's not that the section's too long. That's actually just shortening the section isn't going to change anything, because if that section, the shorter section, isn't going to express it either. There's no tension in that section. It's just going to be shorter, right? So the purpose actually informs what the problem is, which then allows you to actually solve the actual problem rather than all this functional stuff. So all of that to say, I mean, do you think there is an assumption? Is it, because obviously there's an incentive structure here for AI engineers and the people who are designing these tools. Is it that what we're talking about here, this purpose problem, if you like, is too hard, and so therefore, and so it's not being funded, so therefore nobody is doing it? Or is it, I mean, because I'm not sure, I'm not even sure I want an AI, because that's scary in a way. When I think I'm just having this thought for the first time. So actually having an AI with a purpose strikes me as getting close to Terminator land.
That's terrifying. Yeah.
It's like, woo!
I don't want that.
No.
But yeah, from a like purely scientific perspective, if you were trying to create a artificial human intelligence, like you would probably want it to have a purpose. But yeah, we don't want that. So I think there's a couple answers to your question. Making an AI that has a purpose is too hard. Nobody knows how to do it. And yeah, at the same time, if like, I'm not, there's probably people who want to do it because I don't know why. But there's people who want to do things like that.
Probably just because it's a problem to solve, and they're
interested just
in how
a problem
to do it.
To solve.
It's like pulling apart I don't know, a radio or something and seeing how it works. That kind of motivation.
Yeah. So purpose is, nobody knows how to solve that. But function is a lot easier, and all the sort of details of what an AI music generator does are all somewhere within the realm of function, but purpose is always given to a human, right? There's always a human. I think most people agree. I think even Suno and Udio are of the perspective that the human brings the purpose. I don't think they would disagree with that. From there, but I feel like that's important for people who might be hearing this stuff and not knowing what to make of the whole AI thing, and feel discouraged about their practice of making music, right? Because if you listen to something and it's functionally very impressive, it's easy to take away that the AI can do it better than me. So like I'm going to be discouraged about this. And I think that's really not the case, because of this massive distinction that doesn't maybe show up on first listen every time, although many times it does, show up right away. But yeah, it's just lacking purpose. And so it doesn't really change what it means to be an artist fundamentally. And I think like when what you're talking about, the way that you coach people on staying aware of and finding a purpose when they're making a piece of music, like that's ultimately about finding a healthy creative process, right? And it's also interesting that you, in your experience, and this has also happened to me, like you kind of got off track with your creative process into a like an unhealthy place where you were really focused on function too much, and you stopped thinking about the purpose of things, and that didn't work for you. Um, so yeah, like the AI stuff is just completely in that realm. And I feel like, it's really it's really important that people, yeah, can separate those kind of two
Yeah,
things
I mean,
about purpose and function.
there is another difference between an AI having its own purpose and AI understanding the purpose. Because like what I wouldn't want an AI to have its own purpose because I don't know what its purpose. Because if it had its own purpose, then it would be deciding, sort of by definition, what its purpose was, and that purpose may well be in conflict with the purpose of humankind, right? So that's why I don't want the
Yeah.
AI to have its own purpose. Whereas what I could imagine, I think, I'm not sure. No, I think I could imagine wanting. It might be useful. I'm not saying it would always be useful and I would always use it, but what might be useful would be for an AI to understand the purpose that I'm trying to achieve in the music and then it helping me do that. Because at the moment,
Yeah.
Udio and Suno literally cannot do that. They can by accident. So for example, in Suno, if you subscribe, and I'm not subscribed, but if you subscribe, you get a certain number of credits, and then you can get it to make 200 tunes a day or something. So then it's a case of just by accident, it fulfills the purpose. So, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a being able to type some words into a box and say, well, I want it to do this, and this is what hobgoblin means, and whatever it might, however you might describe it. I mean, I don't even know how you would describe it, but it's actually to get it to understand what you're actually trying to do and why in the music, outside of the function, outside of it being functionally correct. I mean, is that something that you could, with what you know about how it works, that you could see as being a possibility or becoming a possibility in the future?
I think I think that's what people are working towards. But I think it's really, really hard. Um, and like for the same reason that people gave up on creating an AI with the purpose, like understanding someone else's purpose is really difficult too. Like because like I don't even think that I could fully understand what your purpose for a piece of music, or that if I was that I could fully explain it to you what my purpose was for a song. Like, um, and I've actually tried to get people to write these things down in like as full detail as I could in my research work. So like one of the big areas in AI now is like how to prompt them, right? Like how to explain what it is that you want. And so this is the kind of work that leads to the interfaces that are in Suno, where you put in words and tags, and lyrics, and it gets something out. It's yeah, it's just way harder for it to fully understand the purpose, than we know how to do. Like I think we're going to make progress towards it. I don't think we'll ever get there. I think we'll make some progress, and all we can hope, what we can expect, I think, is that like instead of you having to generate 200 tracks before it happens to get something that fits. Like maybe, you can bring that number down a little bit, um, and make it like a little bit more in the ballpark. But really you're giving it like kind of guidance, and then you're hoping that it gets what you're saying. Um, I think there's like so and this is kind of a question of interface as well as what you're asking for from a bit of technology. And so, I think most people in who work on AI and music are, I feel like, well aware of the limitations of text, just typing into a text box as an interface. Like there are many things that are very hard to express just through like putting in a few words. Um, and there's a couple, I think things will change probably from two different sides at the same time. One, like we'll have more controls, more expressive ways of communicating your purpose. Even if we never get there or get that close, you'll be able to express more by providing, audio examples, better ways of prompting, that are more like embodied and multimodal and all of these other things. But um, yeah, and you can at the same time try to train models that are like have sort of a better way of understanding those controls. But the further you go down that path, it becomes much harder, much more effort to actually communicate what you're saying to the AI. And so it's not fast anymore. Like
No, exactly. So
if
I'll
you
just do
want
it
to,
myself.
if
I
you,
could
yeah,
just play the
I'll just
melody.
do it myself.
Just play the
Yeah.
just play the bloody melody. Exactly. That is the question. It gets to the point where it's like, well, I mean, for example, I write all of my own emails. Right. I write everything that I write comes from me. I did when ChatGPT first happened, try to get it to see what happened. But if I was to get it right, and it was literally like I was spending. I mean, not that I would have done sort of philosophically made that choice, right? But I just wanted to see what it could do, and it was getting to the point
Yeah.
where it was like taking me longer just to get it even in the ballpark. It was just this very generic nothingness. Even and I, in order to correct my grammar and my sentence structure, do actually use Grammarly, which has AI in it as well. And now Grammarly has an additional thing where it says increase the impact of your text button, and then you have these suggestions. And even then, it's just like, oh god, it's literally sounds like some kind of sort of scam artist on a dodgy website trying to sell you something. It's just like really like, oh god, and so it's just so things like tone and personality, it just doesn't. It's just so nowhere near. Again, it's the similar thing that the actual end result of a piece of music or a piece of text is it contains so much information that we're not aware of, like just even a word, the etymology of a word, like any word, almost any word contains the history of that word within it, and how and whether we know it or not. I mean, to use an example, if you've got kids, when a child asks you what a particular word means, if you've not had kids, then you won't have had this experience. But it's often, in fact, more often than not, extremely hard to actually tell them exactly what a word means. And they go, oh, so it means this. And you're like, no, not exact, kind of. But in this context, yes. But then in that context, no. And then, but, in context, 57B, that would make sense, but it wouldn't make sense if it's like so like trying to define. I mean, it makes me appreciate people who write dictionaries because trying to define what a word means in a given situation, it's like opening Pandora's box. Like it's just all of a sudden that you've got just mess almost of meaning that is rich. I mean, when I say massive meaning, I mean that in a very good way. So in other words, it's rich for a human being to use that word to mean something, but because it's in that context, it means slightly different, and it's got so much in it. And music, because it's even more metaphorical than spoken language, this is kind of times 10 probably. It's like, it's so complex, so almost inscrutable in a way. It's like, it's not that note in that context. This is one of the reasons why I just don't get it when people say that's a bad sound. I'm like, that isn't a bad sound. It's a sound in the wrong context. It's in a context that doesn't work, right? So hobgoblin isn't a bad word. It's just it's a bad word when sung in that context. So because these things, the top level, the thing that we hear, the thing that we perceive, contains such a tapestry of history and information and associations, that even if an AI is trained on everything that has ever, which it seems that many are, everything that has ever happened. I mean, even then it's not trained on everything that's ever happened, because it's just the text, for example, or just the music, right? That it's almost, when you look at just how complicated things are, then you do start to think, hang on a minute, an AI can never be a replacement for a human being. It may well replace human beings if it develops the ability, a sense of purpose, right? But it's not going to be a human being. I mean, you know what I mean? It's not going to be able to. I mean, I don't know if I can, because I don't think I've ever said that and meant it, but the more I talk to you, the more I'm starting to come around to the idea, to the idea that it just literally, that I can't see how it could. I mean, it might be more powerful than a human being, but it's not going to be, it can't replace a human being, because a human being is a human being.
Yeah. I'm not sure that it was necessary, just whether the conversations with me deserve that much credit, or whether, just the time passing and the experience with other, direct experience with what AI is like, has that effect.
Well, I do feel that our conversations allow me to think through. Again, it's like, it's very similar to my experience with our conversations are a little bit like trying to find the purpose in the piece of music that I'm making, in that it's like, I have these feelings and unformed thoughts, and I don't really know what's going on. And then we have a conversation, then I understand more about what I think. So that's very actually similar to my experience of making music in relation to purpose, where it kind of gives me an objectivity, if you like. It gives me an opinion, I understand something about this area that I didn't before, similar to finding the purpose. When I know, it's like there's a very specific moment when I'm like, oh, I know what this piece of music's about. It's a similar thing where it's like an insight. You're like, okay, now I know what this piece of music's about. That now I can actually make it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, even if it's already,
it's kind of the same way for me.
Yeah.
It's similar for me. So for listeners, you should probably just fast forward to halfway through each of these podcasts until we figure out what it is that's the purpose.
What on earth we're going on about?
Yeah.
All right, Rob. I mean, brilliant. So let's leave it there. I had there's a whole rich vein of conversation about. One of the things that I worry about is, and maybe we can pick this up in the next conversation, one of the things I worry about in relation to AI and music is someone like, or a company like Spotify, and obviously having great generic music made rather than having to be licensed. There's a huge incentive structure there, which I can't imagine that any human being would be able to avoid being influenced by. And that is something that does worry me about things like Suno and UDO, and it is the idea of, it's not replacing human. I mean, it's not going to replace what a human can do, but that doesn't mean that many of the functions that music has in our society aren't going to be replaced by AI
Yeah.
music. And that is something I think it would be worth us having a conversation about. Because
Yeah.
it's almost like streaming has replaced vinyl. Vinyl isn't dead. In fact, it's experiencing resurgence, right? So it's like, that's the way I see it, is that Kindle, digital books haven't replaced actual physical books, but there's a much smaller thing in our life now, right? So that's I think something that, while not concerning me to the point of wanting to give up music, in fact nowhere near. I mean, even if no one listened to it, I'd still do it. But it does sort of concern me, and I think I'm interested to know what you think about that. So maybe we can talk about something around that next time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really, really, really big topic, and I would love to get into it with you. Let's do that next time.